Counterpart of the tetrahedron in 3 dimensions, the 4-simplex, or hypertetrahedron, is, as its title implies, the simplest form of regular polyhedra possible in any given dimension. In 2 dimensions, this is the triangle of 3 vertex corners and 3 edge lines. In 3 dimensions, the tetrahedron of 4 triangles. In 4 dimensions, the 4-simplex of 4 tetrahedrons combined into one. When imaging the properties of 4-dimensional polytopes using CGI, however, we are immediately confronted with a significant difference between such hyper shapes and regular polytopes in 3 dimensions, such as the Platonic solids. The vertex corners, edge lines, and cell faces of a 4-dimensional hyper shape can all pass through one another, thus violating the law applicable in 3 dimensions, that surfaces remain impenetrable. We can clearly see in CGI rendered models how the vertex corners, edge lines, and even cell faces of 4-dimensional hyper-shaped regular polytopes can pass through one another. This trait is common to all dimensions greater than the 3rd. The counterpart of the cube in 3 dimensions, the hypercube, or tesseract, is best understood as being a single cube moving between 2 different places in space over a duration of time. Thus, 1 cube becomes 2 equal cubes with the same inner volume and outer surface area. This extension of a single 3-dimensional polytope into a pair of equal polytopes along a dimension that measures duration is the essence of hyperspace geometry as it relates to the possible physics of zero-point energy. If 4-dimensional space may be used to model the 4th-dimensional motion of entropy, then the motions of these 4-dimensional regular polytopes, as rendered according to CGI wireframe modeling, become significantly more relevant to understanding the nature of such hypershapes and their hyperspace geometry as they affect zero-point energy above the speed of light and thus beyond the fastest velocity of entropy. The counterpart of the octahedron in 3 dimensions, the 16-cell regular polytope in 4 dimensions, sometimes called a 4-orthoplex, is dual embedding to the tesseract or 4-dimensional cube in the same way as the octahedron is to the cube in 3 dimensions, and so vice versa as well. The tesseract embeds dually inside of and around the 16-cell in the same way the cube does around and within the octahedron. The 16-cell faces of the 16-cell correspond to the 16 vertex corners of the tesseract, and so the 24-cell faces of the tesseract or hypercube correspond to the 24 vertex corners of the 16-cell regular polytope in 4 dimensions. Again, consider the motions taken by this hyper-octahedron, as it violates the law of impermeable plane spaces in CGI rendering. The 4th dimension of time does not obey the same laws as the 3rd dimension of space. The 24-cell is self-dual, meaning its 24 cell faces map exactly onto its own 24 vertex corners, and it embeds itself within itself. Thus, the 24 cell is truly a 4-dimensional hypershape in the sense of being an object nested within itself, the only difference between the interior and exterior of which is measured as a duration in the 4th dimension, e.g., over time. In 3 dimensions, each regular polytope had a flat surface for its cell faces. The tetrahedron was triangles, the cube squares, the dodecahedron pentagons, etc. But in 4 dimensions, each regular polytope has a 3-dimensional polytope as each of its cell faces. The 4 simplex, or hypertetrahedron, having 4 tetrahedrons as cell faces. The hypercube, or tesseract, having 6 cubes around a central 7th inside of an 8th as its cell faces. And so the 24 cell, with 24 octahedron cell faces, etc. Although the 24 cell is made out of octahedron cell faces, it is not reducible to a 3-dimensional octahedron. Because it is self-dual, it is not accurately comparable to any of the 5 regular polytopes in 3 dimensions. The 24 cell is a hypershape unique to 4 dimensions. The counterpart of the dodecahedron in 3 dimensions. The 120 cell is dual with the 600 cell in 4 dimensions. Because the 600 cell is comparable to the isosahedron in 3 dimensions, and so, like the dodecahedron and isosahedron in 3 dimensions, the 120 cell and 600 cell are dual embedding to one another. The 120 cell faces of the 120 cell correspond to the 120 vertex corners of the 600 cell, and the 600 cell faces of the 600 cell correspond to the 600 vertex corners of the 120 cell.